Hey everybody, Sue here from Sierra Sewing, Quilting, and Vacuums, and today we are working on Frances Firefly. So this is a pattern by Elizabeth Hartman. I love all of her stuff, and what I love is it looks really complicated, but once you get, break it down piece by piece, nothing is hard at all. So I'm excited about the fireflies. It kind of reminds me of when I was a kid chasing fireflies in grandma's backyard. So anyway, the one we're doing actually is going to look different from this picture because we have this beautiful black background and lots of bright colors to go on it. So we're going to take a minute here and show you what that's going to look like, and then we'll get right to cutting. All right, you ready? Okay, so when you open your kit, you're gonna find, first of all, your jelly roll, which we will talk about in depth shortly. You are gonna have these three fabrics. So this one, actually the solid black is your binding, so set that aside for later. The body is gonna be this gray with the little fireflies on it, and then the white is gonna be the little light on the tail. So set those aside for later. We will talk about those shortly. Your background piece is this wonderful black with the little gold moons on it, which the fireflies are going to have a great time playing in that. So we are going to lay this out. Now this is backwards from how I normally would cut because I'm cutting a 14.5-inch wide strip. So there's a couple ways that you can do this. 14 is kind of a wider strip than I normally would cut. So let me show you what I would do for that. So I've already done my best press, and I've pressed it and done that. So it's nice and crisp and ready to cut. I am gonna line up the fold on my fabric is just on a straight line on my mat. And I'm gonna line up my ruler, and this is, again, backwards from what I would normally do because I'm cutting an extra wide strip. But I am lining it up just on a perpendicular line so that when I square off that cut, I know that that's gonna be nice and straight. So let me do that real quick. It's hard to do sitting down. I'm gonna get me some longer arms here. So now I need to measure 14.5 inches. So I can count the lines on my mat, but we all know that the lines on the mat are never as accurate as the ruler. So the ideal thing is if I have a 15.5-inch square, which I happen to have. So I'm gonna measure the 14.5 from the edge of my fabric, and then I'm gonna butt my straight ruler up against that. And then I'm gonna just kind of slide that up and down, make sure I'm straight. And then I know that that's going to be an accurate 14.5-inch cut. So very good. I'm happy with that. So the reason that I'm cutting this extra wide strip is I'm going to subcut that down to 1.5-inch pieces. If I cut an 1.5-inch piece and tried to subcut that into 14-inch units, I'm going to have a lot of waste on the end. I don't like to waste stuff, so we're gonna make this as easy as we can. So I've got my 14.5-inch piece. Now I'm gonna rotate that around. I'm gonna cut off that selvage, and I'm gonna subcut this into 14.5 by 1.5-inch strips. I'll just do one here so you can see. This has got this really pretty extra wide selvage on there. So those of you that do those selvage projects, you're gonna have a heyday with that one. Again, I'm gonna turn my ruler around. The black side, the side with the black numbers, has the 1/2-inch increments, and that's what I want to use for this. So I'm gonna go to the 1.5-inch line, and I am going to subcut that into 1.5 by 14, and again with my fabric folded, that'll give me 2. But you get the idea. So when it's all said and done, you are going to have 20 of those 1.5 by 14.5-inch pieces, and you're gonna label that piece G, okay? Labeling is the whole key to keeping organized on this quilt. Next piece it tells you to cut, I've already cut this, but you're gonna cut 3 4.5-inch strips, and you're gonna cut those into 4.5-inch squares. I put mine in a baggie, and I'm gonna label that Fabric E, 4.5 squares. The next one, I'm gonna cut 7 2.5-inch strips, and again, that's just by the width of the fabric. Those, I'm gonna subcut those into 2.5 by 8. Let's just do one of these here real quick. So again, normally I would just stack them up, but for time's sake, I'm just gonna do one at a time. I'll lay that out here on a straight line on my mat. And again, I like this little 4.5 by 12.5 ruler because it's just really handy for subcutting all this stuff. I'm gonna cut off that selvage. I'm gonna subcut that into 8.5-inch strips. So again, I'm just gonna find the 8.5-inch line on my ruler. I'm gonna line this straight edge up with the straight edge on my fabric. And out of this, I can get 2 of those 8.5-inch strips. And I need a total of, double check so I don't tell you wrong, I'm gonna need 20 of these. So once I get my 8.5-inch pieces off of here, I've got room on the next that I can subcut that into the next piece that I need, which is gonna be the 8.5 by 2.5. So that way the only thing I have to waste is this little piece off the end, okay? And I might even be able to get a 2.5 off that if I needed to, but I don't think I do. So cut your 8.5 inches first. Once you get the 20 that you need, take the 2.5 off the end, and you'll probably have a whole nother strip that you can get the rest of your 2.5s, okay? And again, I'm gonna label that. So my 2.5 by 8.5 is piece F, my 2.5-inch square is piece D, and those are ready. So that way I'm cutting the backgrounds that I need for the whole quilt, so when the time comes to put it together, all I have to do is just grab the right baggie. The next things I'm gonna cut, I've got my horizontal border strip. So that is, it calls for a 3-inch by 30-inch piece, and we'll need 2 of those. I cut the 3-inch strip, but I'm not gonna subcut it to the 30 till I make sure that my dragonflies measure 30. I said dragonflies, these are fireflies. And the next is the horizontal sashing, which is gonna be in between the fireflies. And those are 1.5-inch strips. Once again, I cut the 1.5-inch strip, but I'm not gonna subcut the 30 until I am really sure that that's what my fireflies are gonna measure. Okay, the next are my big side pieces. So give me just a second to get that ready. So now I've cut all of the small units for my I keep calling them dragonflies, but they're still fireflies. So now I'm ready to do these side panels, okay? So I measured what I have left, and I have about 74 inches, and it calls for 70.5. So you have a little bit of fudge room, but not a lot. So we're gonna cut these 2 wide panels, so we'll have those ready to go. The first thing I'm gonna do is I've got my fabric laid on my mat, and this is long ways, and I've got the extra kind of hanging off the table there, so that as I cut a strip, I can just pull it toward me. So I'm gonna take this, and I'm gonna line my ruler up parallel to that fold, and I'm gonna make that cut. And I'm gonna slide my fabric down. So now I've got that long edge cut. I'm gonna separate that. So half of it is gonna be the big 20-inch piece, and the other one is gonna be the 10-inch piece on the other side. If I can do that. Without getting it too wrinkled up. go. So the next thing, I'm going to measure my 20.5 inches. Double check that, 20.5. Good to double check before I start cutting stuff, make sure I got it right. So if you have the 20.5 inch square, this is absolutely the way to go. All right, so I'm gonna lay that on here. I could just cut along that edge. But my 24-inch ruler is a little bit longer, so I'm just gonna measure that along the side, set that aside, and I'm gonna cut that selvage off over here. And again, I'm just gonna take that a section at a time, and I'm gonna work my way all the way down the fabric, just like before. And it helps me to have that second ruler, that way I can double check and make sure I'm parallel on both sides. Okay. All right, so we finished our 72 by 20 inch with the fabric. So this is the other half of the fabric that I cut. And this size, I am going to need a 10.5 by 70 and 70.5. So again, I'm gonna cut the full length of the fabric. I'm not gonna subcut it to the 70.5 until I actually get it next to my dragonflies. Make sure that that's gonna measure the same, because this is not the place that I wanna mess up. That's a big old piece of fabric I'd have to replace. So this time I'm gonna line it up with the 10.5 inch line. And again, on this Creative Grid ruler, on the black side, that gives me the 1/2 inch increment. So I'm gonna measure my 10.5 inch line up with that edge of my fabric. I'm gonna butt my second ruler up against it. And again, I just like to do that because that way with such a wide piece, I can double check myself. So now the fun part, we're gonna play with our jelly roll. It's always fun to open up that jelly roll and see the actual prints that are inside there because you can't really tell until you get it open. But from this, you're gonna need 25 fabrics. So since our background is gonna be black, we wanna get the fabrics that have the most contrast with the black. So when I'm picking my 25 that I'm gonna use, I did not choose some of the dark grays and the deep teals, and even though they're beautiful, they're not gonna show up as pretty on my black background. So I went and I picked out my 25 nice bright colors, and then you wanna sort them out into color families. So if you look at the picture, I've got a teal dragonfly. I keep calling them dragonflies. These are fireflies. We just need to put a disclaimer on the bottom. I really do know the difference. But each of the fireflies are kind of in a color family. So we have them sorted out by that. So I've got two that are kind of in the pink and the coral range, and I've got two that are kind of the deep to light teals, and then one that's this beautiful taupey gray color, okay? And honestly, I cheated. I looked at the picture that the fabric company sent us, and I kind of did the same thing they did. So when I get them sorted, I separate them light to dark, and I labeled that this is gonna be my fabric 1 in that colorway, my fabric 2, and so on. And from those pieces, I can look at my road map here in my pattern and tell what actual sizes I'm gonna cut those. So let's talk about that. So in my pattern, this is actually my road map. So I can look at this and I can see where each of those fabrics is gonna be in relation to that firefly. And I can plan accordingly. So my fabric 1, I've determined that that's gonna be fabric H and I. So that's gonna be closest to the body. And I look at my little cutting chart over here, and from fabric 1, I am going to cut, they're 2.5-inch strips, so I'm gonna subcut into 2 6.5 by 2.5 pieces and 2 4.5 by 6.5 pieces. So again, I lay that out just on a straight line on my mat. Unpin my label here. And I take my ruler that I cannot find. We'll just use this one for now. I want to make sure, because I got an extra wide selvage on there, so I want to make sure I scoot that down far enough that I don't lose anything because of that selvage. And again, I need a 2.5 by 6.5. I always like to cut my biggest pieces first. This ruler is exactly 6.5-inch wide, so that is perfect. And then I'm gonna cut 2 pieces that are 2.5 by 4.5. Again, I'm gonna line up the 4.5-inch line against that cut edge that I just did. I've got a line on my ruler against the edge of that fabric. And those are my pieces H and I that I need for that firefly. I'm gonna label this piece H, this one piece I, and I'm gonna put that in my baggie so when it comes time to sew it together, I am not confused. For now, I'm just gonna pin it back together though. And I've got this much left over for something else fun. Fabric 2 is gonna be my piece J. And I look at my little chart here, my piece J, I just need 2 2.5 by 10.5-inch pieces. I'm gonna again, I want to cut off that selvage. Aren't these the cutest little mushrooms you ever did see? And my 10.5-inch line here. Perfect. I've got this lined up against a straight line on my ruler. And those are my J's. See, not too bad so far, right? Again, I'm gonna label that and I'm gonna put that in my little baggie. Fabric 3 is gonna be K and L. From this one, I need 2 6.5s and 2 8.5s. Again, I always like to cut the big pieces first. There's my 8.5s. And I'll do the same thing with the 6.5. Fabric 4 is M and N. So again, I've got 2 10.5s and 2 6.5s. We're almost done. And last but not least, this is fabric 5. And from this, I need a 6.5 and 4.5. And there we go. So that is the cutting that we need to do for one of our fireflies. So you'll do the same thing with each of your fabric groups, and I cannot emphasize enough that you want to label your pieces once you get them cut. And that way when it comes to time to sew them, you can just flip them into place and you're good to go. All right?
Okay, go for it.
All right, so now we have all of our pieces cut and we have labeled them carefully, and now I've got this all laid out. So this is my body that I'm gonna do. So this is of the body piece, that's an 8.5 by 2.5 inch strip. And then I've got my little tail, which is a 2.5 inch square, and then I've got a 2.5 inch square in the background that I just went ahead and sewed together. So that's done and ready for later. All right, so now I have my wings all laid out, which don't look like much right now, but they're gonna be beautiful here in a minute. So right now, I've got my pieces, and what I did, so this is gonna be piece L. I have a right side and a left side. So when I labeled that, I put piece LR and piece LL, so right and left. So that way, when I get it all together, I am not discombobulated. The other thing is, when I lay that out, I wanna make sure that my strips are going the right direction, because some of these, you need to be You need to have them standing upright. You don't want upside down mushrooms in your dragonfly or firefly. I swear I wasn't going to do that today. Blew it already. So, all right, I've got it all laid out and it's ready to start putting together. So the way we're going to assemble this is what we call a diagonal seam. So not hard at all, but you gotta, again, keep your wits about you, especially because we have two sides and we're gonna have a mirror image of each. So I'm gonna do one go in the left direction and the other side go in the right direction. So again, I just have to think about it ahead of time and keep my head in the game. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start with this corner here and we'll show you how that goes. So if you can see it, I've drawn a diagonal line along this square. And I just want to double check with my pattern, make sure I'm going the right direction. Looks like I am, and I'm going to match that up right in the corner of that strip. And I like to put pins on each side of that just all right.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so I've drawn this diagonal line on the piece of my background 2.5-inch square, and I'm going to put that right in the corner. I like to put a pin on each side of that line, go in the direction that I'm gonna sew, and that just keeps me straight. So then I'm gonna come around over here to my wonderful little machine. Okay, so I've got it set up over here on my Baby Lock chorus, and what I wanna do is I wanna fish it in there so that the corner is right where the needle's gonna come down. So I'm gonna put that right where my little line is, and I'm gonna sew right down the line from corner to corner. But I am lucky enough to have this awesome Baby Lock chorus, and look at this. It's got this cool laser light. So I can arrange my laser light from corner to corner, and that is gonna give me the perfect line to sew on. Okay, so here I am, I'm ready to sew, and I want to talk about this. This is what we call a single hole throat plate. So notice here where the needle's going to go down, there's just a tiny little hole instead of a 7mm wide opening, and that is going to prevent this machine from eating my fabric, because we all know sewing machines love to eat fabric. So when I come over here and I put my needle down right in the corner, it's not gonna suck it down into the mechanism, which is so frustrating. So I'm gonna put my needle down right on that line, and I'm gonna sew right along the line that I marked. But I am lucky enough.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so we're ready to sew now. I wanna talk about, this is a straight stitch throat plate, and what it does is it prevents my fabric from being sucked down into the machine when I start to sew. We all know that sewing machines love to eat fabric, and this just kind of helps keep it nice and flat for you. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna line up that corner of the fabric. I'm gonna put the needle down right on that line, and I'm gonna arrange that out. So I'm gonna sew straight down that diagonal line. Now I am lucky enough that I have this Baby Lock chorus, and it has this really cool laser. So instead of drawing that line, I could save myself a whole lot of time to just use that laser, and I'm gonna shoot that from corner to corner. And when I start to sew, looky there, and I just line up the edge of that laser with the corner of that fabric. Voila. I'm gonna take that, take my pins out, and I wanna fold this back, and I wanna double check and make sure that my corners match. And I'm pretty happy with that. So now I'm ready to add on the next piece. So I'm gonna grab here. I've drawn this line on here, and I'm just gonna double check, make sure that that is going the direction that I want it to go, and it is. So I'm gonna line that again corner to corner. I'm gonna put my pins back on there really quick. And again, I'm gonna use my super cool laser. I'm gonna put my needle right down in the corner there, line up the laser with the corner of that fabric. I think I put my pin too close. Let me try that again. I'm just gonna wing it without that pin. What do you think? All right. So now I have that unit. Double check. I'm gonna make sure it's all going the same direction that I want it to go. And once I've decided that I'm happy, my flower's going the right direction, all that, I am gonna just take my scissors and I'm gonna cut that extra on the back to my 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm gonna do that on both of these pieces that I just added. Okay, then I'm gonna take that, I'm gonna press that really good, and we're gonna go back over to my table.
Go ahead.
All right, so now I've got my piece that we just sewed, and I'm gonna lay that back over here, and I'm gonna look at it. I'm ready to sew my opposite side because it's a mirror image, so this one is gonna go exactly the opposite. So I've sewed this one left to right, this one I'm gonna go right to left. But I look at this, got my flowers upside down. That's why we lay it out before we sew, double check, make sure we're all going the right direction. And I'm gonna sew this just like I did before. So I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna either draw my diagonal line or I'm gonna use my cool laser beam. But this time I'm gonna go the opposite direction. I'm gonna sew that. I'm not gonna take the time to do that on camera. Then same as before, I'm gonna take this unit, I'm gonna sew this the opposite direction so that when it lays out, I get a mirror image of this one that I just sewed, okay? So that's gonna be the top row of my little firefly. The center row, I'm gonna take piece N and piece R. This time, if I look at my little pattern here, the angle goes the opposite direction. So what I wanna do, right sides together, I'm gonna take that piece R and I'm gonna lay that pointing down. And this time I'm gonna sew my angle this direction. And again, I test that out, make sure that that is gonna go the way that I want it to end up. All my flowers are facing the right way, so that's ready to sew. So again, I'm just gonna sew that the opposite direction. Same thing over here, only this time I am gonna take this piece, angle that against, just so that I get a mirror image over here. And I'm not gonna take the time to do that on camera, but it's the same thing over and over. You'll see 90% of this little firefly is that diagonal seam. I come to the next page here for this third row, and all that is, again, piece J and piece O. This time, I'm gonna take this, again, right sides together. My mushrooms are all facing right side up. I'm happy about that. And this one is gonna sew to the opposite end. Again, just that diagonal seam. So I've got my 3 rows together. Do the same thing on the other side. And I am ready to sew my rows together. So give me just a second here. Let me get that ready.
Okay.
Okay, so I got my rows all constructed, can't talk, and now I'm gonna sew those together. So if you look at it, it's not just sewn straight together. One of them is aligned to the right and the other side is aligned to the left here. When I go to sew my corners on, you'll see why that's important. So again, mirror image of each other. I've got one and one here. So I'm gonna take my piece E, which is a background square, and I am gonna line that up diagonally with the corner there. And you can match the sides here. And I'm gonna sew that diagonal seam and flip that back, just like that. And you'll see that if she'd given us the directions to sew that all there, that's just gonna be a piece that I would just cut off and throw away. So that works out perfect for what we need. So I'm gonna do my piece E here, and I'm gonna do another one on this corner, just the same. So my diagonal seam, fold that back. And I'm gonna do the same thing on the mirror image side, and it is going to look something like this. Now, if you're wondering, your eyes are not going bad. These actually are different colors than what we had before, because these are some of the different fireflies, but in different stages It's gonna look like so. So I've got my piece E, I've sewn that diagonally, I'm gonna fold that back and I'm gonna double check, make sure my corners match before I trim off the sides. It's gonna look like that. This is one that I have pressed here. So once I get my piece E's on here, you can kind of see the top of that wing forming. Then I'm gonna take the piece that we did, it's the 1.5 by 14.5 inch piece, and if all is well, that's gonna fit perfectly on the top of each of those to kind of give that background. So I'm gonna put a piece of those on each side of that wing. All right. When I get that done, it's starting to look like something, right? So I've got my piece E on the corner. Now I'm gonna add my antennas. The antenna is a 3.5 inch square, that body, that again, I'm just gonna sew off the corner here. I'm gonna take that, I'm gonna press that over, and it's gonna look like so. And one more, I'm gonna take a 2.5 inch background strip and I'm gonna sew that to the antenna, which kind of leaves that tiny little strip. And it is going to, whoops, go the right direction here. Look like that. So that's my antennas coming off of my Firefly wing. What do you think? It's starting to look like something, right?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I've got the top part of my wings. Now I'm ready to do the bottom part of my wings. Same thing. I'm just gonna look at my little road map. I'm gonna sew, this is actually just 2 units together, but you wanna be careful when you're sewing this one because this point has to match. So when I pressed this one, I pressed one side going toward the background fabric and the other side going toward my actual Firefly wing. And that way when I take that and sew that together, I'm gonna get that nice sharp point that I love so much. So I'm gonna take that, I'm gonna pin it there, and then I'm gonna work to each side to sew that together. And it's gonna look much like this one. Let's see, I have these upside down. But when you come to that corner, look how nice that comes together. So this is gonna be the bottom half of my Firefly. I'm gonna sew that to the top half of my Firefly. I'm gonna add my little body piece that I sewed earlier. Is gonna go right in the middle there. Look how cute he is. All right, so when that's all said and done, we're gonna sew all of our Fireflies together, and that will be here next.
Go for it.
Okay, we're back, and we have all of our Fireflies sewn together. Aren't those pretty? Now, they don't exactly look like the ones I remember from Grandma's yard, but they are lovely, and they show up so pretty on that black background, don't they? So anyway, I've got them all laid out. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add our horizontal sashing pieces, which is the 1.5 inch strips that you cut in the first step when we were doing all the backgrounds. Now, I told you back then, don't subcut it to the 30.5 inches because you wanted to fit whatever size your Firefly turns out to be. So when I measured mine, it wasn't exactly 30.5. Mine was more like 30 3/4, which I don't know if that has a reflection on my sewing or what, but you wanted to fit whatever size that your Fireflies turn out to be. And if they're different sizes, take the average of what that ends up to be. Like I said, I ended up cutting mine 30 3/4. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna take that, and you can use that to square up the size of your strip when it's all said and done. So you want it to be the same size no matter what it is. Okay, so I'm gonna take that. When I pin that, I'm gonna start pinning here. I'm gonna jump down to the other side, I'm gonna pin that there, and if there's any fullness in there that you need to ease out, you want that to be in the middle and not on the edges of your block. And you can press that out. Let your feed dogs do their work, and that will ease out 1/4 inch of a fullness, no problem. So I'm gonna sew these. What I would do is sew a sashing strip to one side of each of these Fireflies, and then sew on the end and make that one big continuous strip. When you get that done, you've got your 3-inch border strips. Same thing, I'm gonna cut that the same 30 3/4 inch, and that, I've got 2 of these strips, so one's gonna go on the top and one's gonna go on the bottom, something like that. Got a little, that strip didn't want to cooperate. So that's gonna balance out the top and the bottom there. And then I'm gonna measure again. I'm gonna measure my long sides. I'm gonna do, I'm gonna cut that big wide piece that we cut very first. I'm gonna cut that whatever my measurement is. So I think it said 70 and a half. Mine was more like 71, but that's okay. I'm gonna cut that whatever it is. I've got that much fudge room. I'm gonna cut that on each side, and then I'm gonna attach those side pieces, and the top is done. So now we just get to do the fun quilting and binding, and then I can't wait to show you how it all turns out.